Wait, you don't keep score. Marcus would find something new within a few weeks, she told herself. He was smart, experienced, capable. The job market was rough but not impossible. This was temporary. She repeated that word to herself more than she realized. Temporary. The first month, Claire covered everything without a single conversation about it. Mortgage, groceries, utilities, car insurance for both vehicles. No list, no announcement. She just did it, the way she'd always handled hard things, quietly and completely. Marcus spent his days sending out resumes, or so he said. She believed him. What she didn't see, what she couldn't see from her desk at work, fielding client calls and managing campaigns and eating lunch at her keyboard, was that Marcus was spending long mornings on the couch, slow afternoons watching television, evenings that somehow arrived before anything productive had happened. He wasn't lazy in a mean way. He was lazy in a comfortable way. There's a difference, and the difference matters. By month 2, something had quietly shifted in the house, not in how they spoke to each other. They were still kind, still warm, but in the texture of daily life. Claire came home to dishes in the sink, laundry half done, dinner not started because he hadn't realized how late it was. Lost track of time, he'd say. She'd nod. Start cooking. Tell herself it was fine. It wasn't fine. But she wasn't ready to say that out loud yet. Here's something worth asking yourself right now. If you were carrying everything financially and coming home to an empty fridge, how many times would you say nothing before something broke inside you? Take your time with that question. Claire's answer took longer than it should have. Month 3 arrived and Marcus still hadn't found work. 2 interviews, neither went anywhere. He stopped mentioning new applications. When Claire asked, vague answers followed. Still looking. Few things in the pipeline. The market's really competitive right now. She accepted each answer with a nod. What she didn't know was that Diane called Marcus every single morning. Long calls, sometimes an hour. And in those calls, Marcus had been telling a very specific version of events. In Diane's mind, Claire's income was simply the natural order of things. Her son was between opportunities. Claire was lucky to have a man like Marcus. Steady, dependable, present. Diane had constructed a reality where her son was doing Claire a favor by existing in her life. She believed it completely, and Marcus, whether consciously or not, had let her build that belief, brick by careful brick. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because this story is only getting started and you do not want to miss where this goes. By month 4, Claire opened a spreadsheet. Not out of resentment, not out of suspicion. She was a marketer. Data was how her brain worked. She needed to see the numbers clearly to know what she was actually dealing with. The labels were simple: date, category, amount, running total, mortgage, $1,147, groceries, $340, utilities, $210, car note, hers, $380, car note, his, $420, insurance, internet, phone bills for both of them. At the bottom of column D, a number appeared that made her sit back in her chair. 4 months in, she had covered $14,260 entirely on her own. She stared at that number for a long time. Then she closed the laptop and went to make dinner. She didn't bring it up that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Instead, she worked harder. A freelance project came through a former colleague. A small brand identity job that paid $3,200. Every dollar went into their joint account without a word. Marcus didn't notice the deposit. That told her something she wasn't ready to name yet. Month 5 brought Diane back. 3 days' notice and a casserole dish she placed in Claire's refrigerator without asking where it should go. She settled into the guest room like she'd always had a standing reservation. She watched Claire leave for work at 7:45 in the morning. "You work very long hours," Diane said over coffee, in a tone that wasn't quite a compliment. "I enjoy what I do," Claire said. Diane stirred her coffee slowly. "Marcus always said he wanted a wife who'd be home more." Claire set her mug down, picked up her bag, looked at Diane with a perfectly level expression. "Have a good morning," she said. and she walked out the door. In the car, she gripped the steering wheel for exactly 4 seconds. Then she exhaled. Then she drove to work and had the most productive day she'd had in weeks. That's the thing about women like Claire. Pressure didn't crack them. It clarified them. A job offer landed in month 6. Entry level at a logistics company. Not what Marcus wanted. Not close to his previous salary, but a paycheck. Real income. A start. He turned it down. The commute was too long, he told Claire. The role wasn't the right fit, he told Diane. Claire heard both versions within 48 hours. She added the month's total to column D. Then she opened a second tab, named it simply Notes. She didn't know yet what she was building. She just knew she needed to start writing things down. Some part of her, the careful, methodical, small-town Ohio girl who learned early never to wait for rescue, already understood that documentation was just another word for self-protection. She wasn't planning anything. Not yet. 14 months. That's how long Claire carried everything before Marcus earned a single dollar toward their shared life. Not 13. Not 15. 14 months of mortgage payments, grocery runs, utility bills, car notes, insurance premiums, and every quiet expense that keeps a household breathing. All of it coming from one person's paycheck while the other person waited for the right opportunity. Not once did she say the words out loud. That detail matters more than anything else in this story. By month 7, the spreadsheet had its own rhythm. Every Sunday evening, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner while Marcus watched television in the other room, Claire would open column D, enter the week's numbers, and watch the running total climb. Not with anger. More like a navigator checking coordinates, not because she wanted to be lost, but because knowing exactly where you are is the only way to figure out which direction to move. The running total at month 7 was $24,890. She closed the laptop, washed the dishes, went to bed. Marcus was already asleep. His breathing was slow and even and completely unbothered. She lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the sound of a man at peace. Month 8 arrived with a new problem. The furnace broke. It chose a Tuesday in February, the kind of cold that makes the walls feel thin and the heating bill feel personal. The repair estimate came in at $3,400. The replacement estimate came in at $7,200. Claire called 3 companies, compared quotes, asked the right questions, chose the repair option and scheduled it for that Thursday. All of it handled during her lunch break. Marcus didn't know the furnace had been fixed until he noticed it was warm again. "Oh, they came already?" he said, genuinely surprised. "Thursday," Claire said. "What did it run?" she told him. He winced, said, "Ouch," went back to his phone. That was the entire conversation. Now here's what you need to sit with for a moment, because this is the part that separates a difficult season from a pattern. One overlooked bill is a bad month. One avoided conversation is a bad week. But when a man watches his wife carry the full financial weight of a household for 8 straight months and responds to a $3,400 repair with the word ouch, that's not a season anymore. That's a structure. And Claire was starting to see its shape. Month 9 brought freelance work she hadn't planned on keeping. Her first project had led to a referral. The referral led to 2 more clients. Suddenly she was working her full-time job from 8 to 6 and building a small side business from 8 to 11, 4 nights a week. Exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. But the money was real. She was good at the work. And there was something in the act of building something entirely her own. Something Marcus's name wasn't on. Something Diane had no opinion about. That felt like oxygen in a room that had been slowly losing air. The spreadsheet running total hit $41,000 in month 10. She stared at that number the way you stare at something you recognize but can't quite believe. $41,000. In 10 months. Alone. She thought about what that figure represented in concrete terms. The mortgage on a house she'd chosen, the food in a refrigerator she filled, the heat in rooms where another person slept unbothered, the car in the driveway that belonged to a man currently circulating a resume he updated every 3 weeks, whether or not he was actively applying anywhere. She didn't say any of that out loud. She opened the Notes tab instead and typed 3 sentences. Then she deleted them. Then she typed them again and left them there. Diane called that evening. Not Claire. Marcus. Claire only knew about the call because she walked past the bedroom and heard her name mentioned in a tone that wasn't warm. She didn't stop walking. She went to the kitchen, made tea, stood at the window looking at the street below. A woman was walking a dog outside, moving at an easy pace. No particular destination visible from where Claire stood. She watched her until she disappeared around the corner. Then she rinsed her mug, dried her hands on the dish towel, the blue one she'd bought herself, the one Diane had once called a strange choice, and went back to her laptop. Month 11, Marcus got a second offer, better company than the first, reasonable commute. Salary that wasn't what he'd made before but was honest and fair and a genuine starting point. 3 days to decide. Claire said nothing during those 3 days. She answered questions when he asked them. She looked at the benefits package with him when he spread it across the kitchen table. She said, "It seems solid," when he asked what she thought. On the 3rd day he called the company and accepted. Claire exhaled somewhere deep in her chest, a release she hadn't known she was holding. He started on a Monday, came home that first evening looking lighter than he had in over a year. She made his favorite dinner. They sat together and he talked about his day and she listened, and it felt for one evening like something had been restored. She updated the spreadsheet on Sunday. Month 11 running total, $51,340. One salary, 1 year, $51,000. She didn't delete the spreadsheet. She saved it, backed it up, moved a copy to a folder she'd named with a single word, a word she hadn't told Marcus about, a word she hadn't told anyone about. The folder was named Eventually. She wasn't sure yet what that meant, but she kept it anyway. The way you keep something you're not ready to use but are too smart to throw away. Marcus having a paycheck changed the atmosphere in the house. Not dramatically, not overnight. But the way a room feels different when someone opens a window. Subtle, real, undeniable. More present now, more engaged. He started cooking dinner on Wednesdays. He remembered to take the trash out without being asked. Small things appeared. Her favorite chocolate bar, a candle she'd mentioned once in passing, a bottle of wine on a Friday just because. Claire noticed all of it. She let herself feel hopeful again. Carefully, quietly hopeful. The way you test ice before stepping fully onto it. The spreadsheet stayed in its folder. The Notes tab stayed exactly as she'd left it. She stopped updating it weekly. That was the closest thing to optimism she allowed herself. It lasted 11 weeks. Diane arrived on a Saturday in what would have been month 13 of the marriage, though Claire had stopped counting in months the way she once had. She'd started counting in patterns instead. This visit was different from the others. Diane had luggage, not an overnight bag, not the small rolling case she usually brought. Actual luggage, 2 checked-size bags and a carry-on, placed in the hallway by Marcus, who carried them in from the car with the easy casualness of someone who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the other person to catch up. "Mom's going to stay for a while," he said. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway. "How long is a while?" Marcus set the last bag down. "Just until she gets sorted. Her landlord's selling the building. She needs a few weeks." Claire looked at the luggage, looked at Marcus, looked at Diane, who was already moving through the living room examining things the way she always did, like she was appraising rather than visiting. "Okay," Claire said. That single word carried more weight than anyone in that hallway understood. A few weeks became 5. 5 weeks of Diane at the breakfast table when Claire came downstairs at 6:30. 5 weeks of opinions delivered as observations. "I notice you don't cook much during the week, and Marcus always preferred a tidier kitchen, and I'm not sure that color works in here. Does it work for you?" 5 weeks of phone calls between mother and son conducted in lowered voices that stopped when Claire entered a room. Every single thing she noticed. Almost nothing she said. What she did instead was work. More clients, better rates. She renegotiated 2 existing contracts and landed a third that paid more than her monthly mortgage. She was building something. She could feel its shape now, even if she couldn't name it fully yet. The eventually folder on her laptop was getting heavier. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? Not because they couldn't see you, but because they'd decided you didn't quite count. That's what Claire's house felt like by week 4 of Diane's visit. Present, functional, even pleasant. But she had stopped being real to the people living in her space. Diane had a gift for rewriting rooms. On a Thursday while Claire was at work, she rearranged the living room furniture. Not dramatically, just enough. The couch shifted 2 feet, the side table moved. The lamp Claire had chosen because its light was warm and not harsh now sat in a corner where it illuminated nothing useful. Claire came home and stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds before she understood what felt wrong. She moved the lamp back that evening without saying a word. Diane moved it again by morning. Claire looked at the lamp in the corner, looked at her coffee, drank the coffee, let the lamp stay. That was the moment. Not the big confrontation, not the dramatic scene. Just a lamp in the wrong corner that she stopped fighting over. That was the moment something in Claire made a quiet, permanent decision. Not about leaving. Not yet. About herself. About what she would and wouldn't spend her energy on anymore. Marcus noticed none of it, or if he noticed, he'd developed a talent for looking at difficult things until they blurred into the background. Good at his new job, happy in the uncomplicated way of a man whose needs were being met from every direction, a wife who managed everything without complaint, a mother who validated everything warmly, a life that required very little discomfort from him personally. He mistook Claire's silence for contentment. That was his second real mistake. The first had been letting her carry everything for over a year without a single honest conversation. But this one, this misreading of a quiet woman as a satisfied one, this one would cost him far more. Diane finally found an apartment in week 6. She announced it over dinner on a Sunday, the dinner Claire had cooked at the table Claire had set, in the house Claire had been paying for since before Marcus contributed a single dollar toward it. Found a lovely place, Diane said, cutting her chicken. 2 bedrooms. Good natural light. That's wonderful, Claire said, and she meant it. What she didn't say, what she folded neatly away and carried back to her laptop that evening, was that Diane's departure felt less like relief and more like a preview of what quiet felt like, what space felt like, what a room looked like when no one was slowly, cheerfully, methodically dismantling the life you'd built inside it. That night she opened the spreadsheet for the first time in 11 weeks, updated every column, opened the Notes tab, read what she'd written months ago, added 4 new lines, closed the laptop, sat in the kitchen with the lamp, her lamp, the warm one, plugged into the outlet beside her chair, casting exactly the light she'd always wanted. Just her, just the light, just the quiet. It was the best she'd felt in months, and that solitary peace, that was the most honest thing she'd learned about her marriage so far. Diane's new apartment was 12 minutes away. Claire discovered this on the 3rd visit in 2 weeks, when she clocked the drive home on her phone out of pure habit. 12 minutes. Close enough for drop-ins. Close enough for Sunday dinners that somehow always happened at Claire's house. Close enough for Marcus to pop over on a Saturday morning and return 4 hours later, slightly distant, like he'd been reminded of a version of himself that existed before Claire. She never said anything about the visits. She just noticed the pattern the way she noticed everything, without performance. The Sunday dinners became a fixture by month 15. Claire cooked. That was simply how it went. Not because anyone asked her to, not because it was ever discussed or decided, but because she was the one who planned meals, bought groceries, knew what was in the refrigerator, and understood that if she didn't start cooking by 5:30, dinner wouldn't happen. Diane would arrive at 6 with a bottle of wine she hadn't paid much for and an appetite for conversation that ran entirely in one direction. Marcus talked. Diane listened. Diane talked. Marcus agreed. Claire refilled glasses and moved between the kitchen and the table and contributed sentences that were received politely and forgotten immediately. She was the host of a dinner party she hadn't been invited to. By the third Sunday, she'd started timing herself, not consciously, just noticing. From the moment Diane arrived to the moment the door closed behind her, Claire spoke a total of maybe 40 words that weren't about food or logistics. 40 words in 4 hours. She thought about that on the drive to work Monday morning. Then she thought about a campaign pitch she was preparing and the math of what her freelance income had become and the satisfaction of work that asked everything of her brain and gave back in direct proportion. She stopped thinking about the 40 words. There were better things to count. Month 16 brought a dinner that was different from the others. Marcus's brother was visiting from out of town. Daniel, easygoing, genuinely warm, the kind of man who asked follow-up questions and laughed with his whole face. Claire had always liked Daniel. He treated her like a full person, which she'd come to understand was not something she should have had to notice but did. The dinner was louder than usual. More people, more noise, more wine. Diane was in a particular mood, expansive, performative, holding court at the head of a table that technically belonged to someone else. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, Diane started talking about Marcus's ex-girlfriend. Not maliciously. That was the thing about Diane. She never did anything maliciously in public. She did it warmly, cheerfully, with a smile that made it impossible to object without looking like the difficult one. Simone was such a wonderful cook, Diane said, to no one and everyone. Marcus, remember that lamb she used to make? Every Sunday. The whole house smelled incredible. Marcus smiled. Yeah, she could cook. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat. Claire took a sip of her water. She was very domestic, Diane continued. Very present. Some women are just naturally that way, aren't they? Not a question. Claire set her glass down, looked at Diane with an expression so neutral it was almost architectural. The pasta's getting cold, she said, and she stood up to clear the first course. In the kitchen, she stood at the sink for exactly 30 seconds. Hands flat on the counter, eyes on the window above the faucet, which showed her nothing but her own reflection and the dark outside. 30 seconds. Then she picked up the serving dish and went back to the table. Daniel caught her eye as she sat down. He gave her a look that said he'd seen everything and was sorry and didn't know what to do with that. She gave him a small smile that said she knew, and it was fine. And please just eat your pasta. The dinner ended. People left. Marcus walked his mother to her car while Claire stacked dishes in the kitchen. She could hear them talking outside, low voices, occasional laughter, the easy intimacy of a relationship that had never required anyone to prove their worth. She washed the good wine glasses by hand because they weren't dishwasher safe, dried each one carefully, placed them back in the cabinet above the refrigerator. Marcus came back in when the kitchen was already clean. Good night, he said, kissing her cheek. She said. He went to shower. She sat down at the kitchen table with her laptop, opened the spreadsheet, updated the columns, then opened the notes tab and wrote one sentence. Just one. She compared me to his ex-girlfriend at my own dinner table, and he said, yeah, she could cook. She read it twice, left it there, closed the laptop, looked around her kitchen, the tiles she'd sourced from 3 different suppliers to get the right tone, the pendant light she'd researched for 6 weeks before buying, the small herb garden on the windowsill she'd kept alive through 2 winters. Every single thing in this room had been chosen, sourced, paid for, and maintained by her. Every single thing. And she had just been compared unfavorably to a woman who made lamb on Sundays, at her own table, in her own kitchen, in a house she alone had held together for 16 months before Marcus earned a cent toward it. She didn't cry. She wasn't angry in the sharp, immediate way that makes noise. Something quieter and more permanent than anger had settled in her. She was clear, that night, lying in the dark beside a man who was already asleep. Claire made no decisions. She didn't plan. She didn't rehearse conversations or imagine outcomes. She just lay there, completely still, and let herself finally, fully, honestly, see the shape of what her life had become. Not the story she'd told herself about temporary seasons and patient love and good men going through hard patches. The actual shape. The real one. And once you see something that clearly, you cannot choose to unsee it. That's not pessimism. That's just how sight works. The next morning, nothing changed. That's what people misunderstand about women like Claire. They assume that clarity leads immediately to action, that the moment you see something clearly, you pick up your keys and walk out the door. But real clarity doesn't work that way. Real clarity is quieter than that, more patient, more precise. Claire woke up, made coffee, kissed Marcus on the cheek when he came downstairs and went to work. Same route, same parking spot, same desk, different woman sitting in the chair. The shift wasn't visible from the outside, not cold or distant or suddenly difficult. She laughed at the right moments, answered emails thoroughly, presented the campaign pitch she'd been preparing, and won the client before lunch. She was excellent at her job on the worst days of her personal life. That had always been true. What changed was something interior, a small permanent recalibration that happened without fanfare and without announcement. The part of her that had been waiting for Marcus to see her, to step up, to become the partner she'd believed he was capable of being, that part quietly, finally, stopped waiting. She didn't tell him. She didn't tell anyone. She just stopped. The documentation began that Thursday, not the spreadsheet. That had existed for months. This was something different, more deliberate, more structured. Claire was a woman who understood systems, and she began building one with the same methodical focus she brought to every professional project she'd ever managed. A new folder on her personal laptop. Not the work one, the personal one she kept in her bag and never left unattended. Inside it, 3 subfolders. The first was labeled Financial. Inside it, she began organizing everything she already had. The spreadsheet, the bank statements she downloaded monthly, the mortgage documents with her name as primary borrower, the utility accounts she'd set up in her name before Marcus was employed, the insurance policies, the car loan paperwork. She wasn't creating evidence. She was organizing truth. There's a difference, and the difference matters enormously. The second subfolder was labeled Communication. She began forwarding emails to a private address she'd set up years ago for freelance work. Any email that referenced shared finances, household decisions, property matters. She screenshot text conversations where money was discussed. She wasn't selective about what she saved. She saved everything and let the record speak for itself. The third subfolder she labeled Witness. That one stayed empty for a while. She wasn't sure yet what it was for, but she created it anyway. Work became her sanctuary in a way it hadn't been before. Not because the work changed, but because she let herself need it differently. The late nights, the early mornings, the freelance projects that demanded her focus past 10 p.m., she stopped apologizing internally for any of it. This is mine, she thought, sitting at her desk on a Thursday evening after everyone else had gone home. Every bit of this is mine. She wasn't bitter about it. She was just finally honest about it. Marcus noticed she seemed distracted. He mentioned it on a Sunday. The words chosen casually slipped into conversation while they were both in the kitchen, him making coffee, her reviewing a contract at the table. "You've seemed far away lately," he said. She looked up. Considered him. Really considered him. The way you look at something you're trying to memorize or something you're trying to understand. "Work's been intense," she said. He nodded. Poured his coffee. Seemed satisfied with that answer in the way that people are satisfied with answers when they weren't really asking a question so much as making a noise in the direction of a feeling they didn't want to examine too closely. He sat across from her. Picked up his phone. She went back to her contract. They sat like that for 40 minutes. Comfortable. Quiet. Completely separate. That Sunday, Diane called during dinner. Marcus answered at the table, something Claire had mentioned before, gently once. He stepped into the hallway but left the door open so she could hear everything anyway. The call lasted 19 minutes. Claire ate her dinner, cleared the table, started the dishes. He came back when the kitchen was already half clean. "Sorry," he said, not sounding particularly sorry. "It's fine," she said, not meaning it particularly. He picked up a dish towel, dried 2 plates, then set the towel down and said he was going to watch something in the other room. She finished the dishes alone. That night she added a note to the communication folder. Not about the phone call, that was too small to document. About the dish towel, about the 2 plates, about the arithmetic of a man who considered 2 plates a contribution and walked away from the rest without guilt. She wasn't sure why she wrote it down. She wrote it down anyway. Month 17 arrived with a piece of mail that changed the texture of everything. A letter from the bank, addressed to her, regarding the mortgage. A routine notice about a rate adjustment coming in the next cycle. Standard language, standard format, completely unremarkable. Except that Marcus picked it up from the mail pile, looked at it, and set it back down. "Bank stuff," he said. "Probably nothing." He'd been living in this house for 17 months. His name was on the lease they'd left behind. It was not on this mortgage. He didn't know that. She had never told him, not because she was hiding it. The paperwork had simply happened before the wedding, when she'd been approved solo based on her income and credit, and Marcus had been between jobs, and the timeline hadn't waited. She'd meant to add him later. The later had never arrived. Standing in the hallway looking at a man who'd just dismissed a letter about a mortgage he didn't know he wasn't on, Claire felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not anger. Something closer to grief. For the version of this marriage she'd believed in. For the partnership she'd built the whole thing around. For the woman she'd been on that Tuesday night when Marcus got down on one knee between the couch and the coffee table, and she'd said yes before he finished the question. She picked up the letter, took it to her folder, filed it under financial, sat down at her desk, opened the witness subfolder, and for the first time, started typing. The witness document started with a single line. "I have been the only financial support in this household for 17 months. Marcus does not know the mortgage is in my name alone." She read it back, left it exactly as written, no edits, no softening. Just the fact, stated plainly, the way facts deserve to be stated. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed. She slept better that night than she had in weeks. Not because anything had changed, not because she'd made a decision or taken an action or moved a single piece on the board. Just because the truth was somewhere outside her head now. Written down. Real. Witnessed, even if only by herself. There's something about naming a thing that stops it from growing in the dark. Spring came through the windows in month 18, and with it a version of Marcus Claire hadn't seen in a while. Lighter, more present. He'd found his rhythm at work, gotten comfortable, earned some respect, started talking about projects with the energy of a man who felt useful again. He brought that energy home some evenings, and it was good when he did. Warm, familiar. A glimpse of the man she'd fallen in love with over leftover pasta and a half-watched documentary. She didn't trust the glimpses anymore. That wasn't bitterness. It was information. When someone shows you who they are across 17 months of evidence, a good week isn't a correction. It's a data point. And Claire had too many data points now to mistake a good week for a changed pattern. She was warm with him anyway. Kind. Present. She just kept the folder updated. Diane had opinions about the spring. She arrived one Saturday with unsolicited garden advice. Claire had started a small raised bed along the back fence, growing tomatoes and herbs and one stubborn row of sunflowers that refused to cooperate with her timeline. Entirely hers. She'd built the frame, sourced the soil, planted everything from seed on a cold March morning, because she needed one thing in her life that grew exactly as she tended it. Diane walked the length of it with her hands clasped behind her back. "You've put the tomatoes too close together," she said. "I followed the spacing guide," Claire said. "The guide isn't always right." Diane crouched, examining a plant. "Marcus's father grew tomatoes for 30 years. You need more room between them or they'll compete." Claire looked at her tomatoes, looked at Diane. "I'll keep an eye on them," she said. She did not move the tomatoes. Full, heavy, unreasonably productive by August. She made a sauce from the first batch and said nothing about it to anyone. But inside, privately, she counted those tomatoes as a win. You take your wins where you find them. Marcus started repeating things that month, small things at first. Observations delivered casually over dinner or in passing, about Claire's hours, her focus on work, the freelance projects that kept her at her laptop past 10. The observations weren't cruel. Phrased with a kind of mild concern that would have been touching if she hadn't recognized the origin. You should have more balance, he said one evening. She looked up from her laptop. Balance, she said. Yeah. You work constantly. It's a lot. She thought about the spreadsheet, about $51,000, about a furnace fixed during a lunch break while he watched television in the next room. I enjoy the work, she said. He gave her a look, patient, slightly pitying, that she recognized from somewhere. 3 days later, she realized where she'd seen it. Diane's look, the same tilt of the head, the same quality of concern that wasn't quite concern. He was borrowing his mother's eyes. That realization sat in her chest like a stone for the rest of the week. She didn't mention it. She opened the witness document instead and wrote 2 paragraphs. Clinical, specific, dated. She described the conversation word for word. She noted the look. She wrote down the origin she'd identified. Then she added a line at the bottom that surprised her when she read it back. I think he has been telling her more than I realized. I think the story she has about me came from him. She stared at that line for a long time. Then she saved the document and went to check on her tomatoes. The confrontation, the real one, the one that would change everything, didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived the way Diane always arrived, without warning, on a Wednesday evening, when Claire had just gotten home. She heard them before she reached the kitchen. Diane's voice carrying the way it always did, certain, unhurried, built for rooms larger than the one it occupied. She's not present, Marcus. A wife should be present. Claire stood in the hallway, still, coat still on. She works hard, Mom. Working hard isn't the same as being home. You need someone who prioritizes this family. A pause. The silence of a man deciding how much of himself to spend. She does prioritize us, Marcus said. But the sentence had a shape to it, trailing, uncertain, the verbal equivalent of a man taking a step back from a position he'd never fully committed to. Diane's response was quiet. Claire caught only the end of it. Deserve better than this. Claire stood in the hallway for 3 more seconds. Then she walked into the kitchen. Both of them looked at her. Diane with the calm of someone who'd been caught doing exactly what she intended to do. Marcus with something more complicated. Guilt dressed as surprise, layered over a deeper discomfort she'd seen before but never named until now. Shame. He was ashamed of being caught, not ashamed of what had been said. Hi, Claire said. She set her bag on the counter, opened the refrigerator, took out the ingredients for dinner. Diane stayed for 2 hours. Claire cooked, served, cleared, washed up. The whole time something was moving through her. Not anger, not hurt, but a kind of cold, clarifying focus she recognized from her best days at work. The days when everything simplified. When she could see exactly what needed to happen and exactly how to make it happen. After Diane left, Marcus said, She means well. Claire turned from the sink, looked at him, said nothing. Dried her hands on the blue dish towel, went to her desk, opened the witness document, and wrote the longest entry she'd written yet. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Claire was at her desk, real desk, work desk, the one with the good monitor and the coffee she'd made precisely right that morning, and the campaign brief she'd been working through methodically since 8 a.m. The kind of productive Thursday that felt like a reward for every difficult week that had come before it. Her personal phone lit up on the corner of the desk. Diane. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Then she picked up. Claire. Not a greeting. A summons. Diane. Same energy. Returned without hesitation. A brief pause. The kind that happens when someone realizes the other person isn't going to soften the room for them. We need to talk about Marcus, Diane said. Claire leaned back in her chair, picked up her pen, clicked it once, set it down. "All right," she said. What followed was 9 minutes and 40 seconds. She clocked it, not intentionally, just the way her brain worked, cataloging everything. Of the most precisely constructed character assassination she'd ever had the experience of receiving. Diane did not shout. She never shouted. Shouting was too honest, too visible, too easily identified as attack. Instead, she spoke in the measured, reasonable tone of a woman who believed she was stating observable facts about a situation that had gotten out of hand. Claire worked too much. Claire was emotionally unavailable. Claire had never truly made Marcus a priority. Claire had no children yet, which at her age, with this level of career focus, well, Claire kept the house in a way that suggested she viewed it as a hotel rather than a home. Claire had never really understood what Marcus needed. Each sentence arrived cleanly, separated by just enough pause to land fully before the next one followed. An impressive performance, objectively. Diane had clearly been building toward this for a long time. Claire listened to all of it. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend. She held the phone and listened the way she read contracts, looking for the structure beneath the language, finding where the actual argument lived underneath the presentation. And then Diane said it. "My son will divorce you." Calm. Absolute. Delivered with the quiet certainty of a woman who believed she controlled the ending of this story. He deserves a real partner, someone present, someone who puts family first. You've had every opportunity to be that person, and you've chosen your career instead. This marriage isn't working, and Marcus knows it. Silence. Claire sat perfectly still in her chair. Outside her office window, the city moved. Traffic, pedestrians, a delivery truck pulling away from the curb, ordinary life continuing in every direction with complete indifference to the phone call happening on the 4th floor. She thought about the spreadsheet. Month 1 through month 14. The months Marcus contributed nothing. The mortgage, the groceries, the car note on the vehicle Diane rode in every time she visited, the furnace, the freelance hours, the Sunday evenings updating columns D through G while the man Diane was defending slept unbothered in the next room. She thought about $51,000. She thought about a folder named Eventually and a subfolder named Witness and 3 years of quiet, documented, irrefutable truth sitting on a personal laptop in a bag currently hanging on the back of her office chair. Yellow curtains. A lamp in the wrong corner. 40 words in 4 hours. A dish towel set down after 2 plates. A man who said, yeah, she could cook, at his wife's dinner table while his mother smiled. 9 minutes and 40 seconds of Diane's careful architecture. And underneath all of it, underneath every crafted sentence and measured pause, the foundational assumption that made the whole structure possible. Diane had no idea who she was talking to. She had built an entire case against a woman she'd never actually seen. The woman she was describing, absent, selfish, career-obsessed, an insufficient wife, was a fiction assembled from the version of Claire that Marcus had allowed her to construct. A version with all the financial reality removed. A version where the mortgage paid itself and the groceries appeared, and the utilities stayed on, and the household held together through some invisible, unacknowledged force that had nothing to do with the woman Diane was currently dissecting on a Thursday afternoon. Claire let the silence sit for 5 full seconds after Diane finished. Then she said, "I hear you, Diane." That was all. Not agreement, not defense, not anger. Just acknowledgement, clean, neutral, impenetrable. Another pause. Diane had expected more, tears or justification or the satisfying crack of a woman who'd been successfully destabilized. She got none of those things. "I think you should really consider what I've said," Diane added, slightly less certain now. "I will," Claire said. "Marcus deserves." "I'll let you go, Diane. Thank you for calling." And she hung up. She set the phone face down on her desk, picked up her pen, opened the campaign brief, read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a word. Then she closed the brief, opened her personal laptop, and began typing. The witness document entry she wrote that afternoon was the longest one yet. Detailed, chronological, exact. She transcribed the call from memory with the precision of someone who had been paying close attention to every word. She noted the time. She noted the phrases. She noted what Diane had assumed and what Diane had not known and the distance between those two things. She wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. Then she opened the financial folder, updated the spreadsheet. The running total for 3 years, 36 months, including the 14. Marcus contributed nothing, and the 22 he contributed partially while Diane's lifestyle continued unbothered, sat at the bottom of column D. She looked at the number for a long time. Then she picked up her phone, called her sister. "Are you free this weekend?" she asked when her sister picked up. "For you? Always. What's going on?" Claire looked out her office window, at the city, at the ordinary Thursday afternoon moving past her like it always had. "I need to talk to someone," she said, "in person." Her sister's voice shifted, not alarmed, just present. Fully, immediately present in the way that only people who actually love you can be. "Come Saturday," her sister said. "I'll make lunch." Claire exhaled. "Okay," she said. She hung up, sat quietly for a moment. Then she saved the witness document, backed it up to 2 separate locations, and returned to the campaign brief. She finished it before 5. It was some of her best work. Saturday arrived the way good things do when you need them most. Without fanfare, just light through the curtains at 7:15 and the stillness of a morning that belongs entirely to you before anyone else lays a claim to it. Claire was up before Marcus. She always was. She made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, watched the neighbor's cat pick its way across the fence with the unhurried confidence of a creature that has never once doubted its right to be exactly where it is. She envied that cat more than she expected to. She left a note on the counter. "Gone to Sarah's. Back tonight." Simple. True. Requiring nothing from him. The drive to her sister's took 40 minutes through Saturday morning traffic that was light and unhurried. She listened to nothing. No music, no podcast. Just the sound of the road and the comfortable noise of her own thinking. By the time she pulled into Sarah's driveway, she knew exactly what she was going to say. That was the thing about 3 years of quiet documentation. You stopped needing to figure out the story. The story was already written. You just had to say it out loud for the first time. Sarah opened the door before Claire knocked. Sisters know things. One look at Claire's face, not devastated, not tearful, just tired in that deep structural way that goes beyond sleep. And she stepped aside without a word. Lunch was already on the table. Soup and bread and the care of someone who understood that feeding a person was sometimes the clearest way to say, "I see you." They sat down. Claire wrapped her hands around the bowl, and she talked. Not emotionally, not the way people imagine a woman finally telling her truth will look, with tears and shaking hands and a voice that breaks. Claire talked the way she wrote the witness document, clearly, chronologically, with specific numbers and specific dates and moments laid out in order so the shape of them was undeniable. 14 months of sole financial support, $51,000, a mortgage in her name alone, a folder named Eventually, the dinner where Diane compared her to the ex-girlfriend, the lamp in the wrong corner, the dish towel set down after 2 plates, the phone call on Thursday. "My son will divorce you." Sarah listened to all of it without interrupting. That was her gift, the ability to hold space without filling it. She ate her soup slowly and let Claire's words land without rushing to respond or reframe or reassure. When Claire finished, the soup was cold and the bread had been torn into small pieces neither of them had eaten. Sarah looked at her for a long moment. "How long have you known?" she asked. Claire understood exactly what she was asking. "A while," she said. "I just needed to finish building what I was building first." Sarah nodded slowly. The folder. The folder. Another silence. Comfortable. The kind that only exists between people who've known each other long enough to understand that some truths need a moment of air before anyone tries to do anything with them. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. That question, The directness of it, the absence of advice or judgment or the exhausting impulse to fix, made Claire's eyes fill for the first time since Thursday. Not tears, just the pressure of them. Controlled, present, honest. "I need you to know," Claire said. "That's all right now. I just needed one person to actually know." Sarah reached across the table and put her hand over Claire's. They sat like that for a while. Outside, a neighbor was mowing a lawn. A dog barked twice and went quiet. Ordinary Saturday life continuing in every direction, indifferent to the conversation happening at Sarah's kitchen table. Claire drove home that evening feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Not resolved, not decided, not ready, just accompanied. Like someone had turned a light on in a room she'd been navigating in the dark, and even though everything in the room was exactly the same as it had always been, she could finally see all of it clearly and from every angle. Marcus was watching television when she got back. "Good visit?" he asked, not looking away from the screen. "Really good," she said. She went to her desk, opened her laptop, opened the Eventually folder, sat for a long moment looking at everything inside it. The financial subfolder, the communication subfolder, the witness subfolder with its 40-minute Thursday entry still open from the last time she'd saved it. She didn't open any of them. She just looked at the folder. Then she opened a new document. Clean, blank, unnamed. And she began writing something she'd never written before. Not notes, not documentation, not evidence, a letter. To herself. It started the way all honest things start, with the simplest possible statement of truth. "I have been waiting for a man to become who I believed he was. I think I need to stop waiting." She wrote for an hour. When she finished, she read it back once. Then she saved it in the Eventually folder, in a subfolder she created right then and named with 2 words. No more. She closed the laptop, washed her face, brushed her teeth, got into bed beside a man who was already asleep. Lay in the dark with her eyes open. Outside, the city made its quiet nighttime sounds. Distant traffic, a siren somewhere far off, the low hum of a world that keeps moving regardless of what any single person decides inside it. She didn't make any decisions that night. She didn't need to. The decision had already been made. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. That part was coming. And when it came, when Claire finally opened her mouth and said the thing she'd been building toward for 3 years, Marcus would not be ready. Diane would not be ready. Neither of them had ever taken the time to understand who they were actually dealing with. That was the last mistake either of them would make on this subject. She gave it 2 more weeks, not out of hesitation, not because she was second-guessing herself or softening or looking for reasons to stay in a story she'd already finished reading. She gave it 2 weeks because she was methodical, always had been, and methodical people don't move until they're certain every piece is exactly where it needs to be. She used those 2 weeks well. On a Monday morning, she called a lawyer from her car in the work parking garage, a woman named Patricia, recommended by a colleague, discreet, unhurried, exactly the kind of professional who made you feel like you'd already made the right decision just by sitting across from her. They met for 90 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon. Claire brought the folder. Patricia went through it page by page. The spreadsheet, the bank statements, the mortgage documents, the communication records, the witness document, printed and organized chronologically. Patricia looked up when she finished. "You've been thorough," she said. "I'm good at my job," Claire said. Patricia almost smiled. "This is useful, all of it." They talked through the practical landscape, what the documentation established, what the mortgage situation meant, what 3 years of sole financial contribution looked like in a legal context. Patricia was honest without being dramatic. She laid out the terrain clearly and let Claire navigate it herself. Walking back to her car afterward, Claire felt something she recognized from work. The confidence of someone who has done the preparation and is no longer afraid of the meeting. She was ready. The conversation happened on a Sunday evening, not planned for Sunday, but Sunday arrived and Marcus was home and the house was quiet and something in Claire's body said now. The way it sometimes did at work when a negotiation had gone on long enough and it was time to close. She made tea first, 2 cups, set them on the kitchen table, called his name. He came in from the living room with the slightly wary look of a man who has learned, somewhere in the back of his nervous system, that 2 cups of tea on the table on a quiet Sunday means something is about to be required of him. He sat down. She sat across from him. No accusation. No emotion. No phone call. No mother. No dinner. No lamp. No dish towel. No 100 moments she could have opened with. She opened with a question. "Marcus," she said, "what do you think our financial arrangement has looked like over the past 3 years?" He blinked, wrapped his hands around his mug, settled into the chair the way people do when they're deciding how honest to be. "We've both contributed," he said. "You more than me for a while, but we've both—" "I want to show you something," she said. She opened the laptop, turned it to face him. The spreadsheet filled the screen, clean, color-coded, every column labeled, every figure sourced and dated and running to a total at the bottom of column D that sat there like a verdict. Marcus looked at it. The color changed in his face, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way light changes in a room when a cloud moves across the sun. Slow, undeniable. He scrolled down without being invited to, read the numbers. The months with zeros in his contribution column, 14 of them laid out in pale yellow. The mortgage figures in column B, consistent, unbroken, every single month in her name. The freelance income she'd added to carry the shortfall, marked in a separate column she'd labeled simply, additional. The total at the bottom. He stared at that number for a long time. "Claire. The mortgage is in my name," she said. "Only my name. Your name was never added. I want you to know that." Another silence. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The refrigerator made its low, steady hum. "I didn't know it was that much," he said finally, and there it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I should have done more." Not, "I had no idea you were carrying this alone and I'm devastated that I let that happen." I didn't know it was that much. The arithmetic concerned him. The weight she'd carried did not. Claire had prepared herself for many possible versions of this conversation. She'd imagined defensiveness, anger, justification, even the remote possibility of genuine remorse. She'd played out the responses, prepared her answers, anticipated the shape of his reaction with the same care she brought to difficult client negotiations. She had not prepared herself for how small his response would feel, how thin. "Your mother called me on Thursday," she said. Her voice was even, unhurried. "She told me you were going to divorce me." Marcus set his mug down. "She shouldn't have done that." "No," Claire said. "She shouldn't have." "I didn't ask her to." "Marcus." She said his name the way you say something when you need someone to stop talking and start listening. "What have you told her about us, about our finances, about why things have been difficult?" The silence that followed was its own answer. She watched it move across his face, the calculation, the decision about how much to admit, the careful selection of a version of the truth that protected him most efficiently. "I may have vented," he said. "She's my mother. I talked to her. You let her believe I was the problem." Not a question. He looked at the table. "I didn't correct her," he said, quietly, like an admission he hadn't planned to make. 3 words. "I didn't correct her." She'd carried $51,000 and 3 years of silent labor and a household held together by her income and her planning and her Sunday evening spreadsheet updates. And when his mother constructed a fiction where Claire was the failing wife, he had simply let it stand. She sat with that for a moment. Then she reached across the table and closed the laptop. "I've spoken to a lawyer," she said. Marcus looked up. His face in that moment. She would remember it for a long time. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, just as information. The face of a man who had believed, somewhere beneath everything, that the structure would hold forever, because it always had. "Claire, I haven't made any final decisions," she said. but I needed you to know where I am." She picked up her tea, took a sip, set it back down. "I needed you to finally see the actual picture." He didn't say much after that. What he did say was inadequate in the way of a man who has never had to develop the vocabulary for a moment like this because he'd never believed the moment would come. She listened to all of it anyway. Then she rinsed her mug, dried her hands on the blue dish towel, went to her desk, opened the No More document, added one line at the bottom. He said he didn't correct her. That's all I needed to hear. Saved it. Closed the laptop. Went to bed. Slept deeply, completely, without interruption. For the first time in longer than she could remember, word travels in families the way water travels through old walls. You don't see it moving. You don't hear it. But one morning you press your hand to the surface and feel the damage that's been spreading quietly for longer than anyone admitted. And by then it's already structural, Marcus told his brother first. Not intentionally. Or at least not with the clean intention of someone making a deliberate choice. He called Daniel on a Monday evening, the way he'd been calling Daniel his whole life when something was too large to sit with alone, and he said the words in the order they came to him. Claire had shown him a spreadsheet. A number sat at the bottom. She'd spoken to a lawyer. Daniel listened the way he always did, fully, without interruption, without rushing to fill the space with his own reaction. When Marcus finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked one question. How much was the number? Marcus told him. Another silence. Longer this time. And she carried that alone, Daniel said. Not a question. A thing being understood in real time, out loud. The job market was Marcus. Daniel said his name the way Claire had said it at the kitchen table. Gently. Precisely. Like a hand placed on a shoulder to stop forward motion. How long did you know it was that bad? The silence that followed lasted long enough to be its own answer. They stayed on the phone for another hour. Daniel didn't lecture. Not built for lectures. Built for honest conversation, which is harder and rarer and worth considerably more. He asked questions and listened to the answers and occasionally said things that Marcus didn't want to hear but couldn't argue with. By the end of the call, Daniel knew most of the picture. By Tuesday, his wife knew. By Wednesday, the shape of it had reached the outer edges of the family in the way these things always do. Not through gossip exactly, but through the gravity of a significant truth that pulls people into its orbit whether they intend to enter or not. Diane found out on a Thursday. Not from Marcus. Not from Daniel. From her sister, Marcus's aunt, who'd heard from Daniel's wife and called Diane with the energy of someone delivering news they've convinced themselves is an act of concern. Claire wasn't there for that conversation. She didn't need to be. She could reconstruct it from what came next. Diane called Marcus 4 times between Thursday afternoon and Thursday evening. Claire knew because she was home for 2 of those calls and watched Marcus take his phone to the bedroom each time, closing the door with the careful quietness of a man who understood finally that some conversations required walls between them. She didn't press her ear to the door. She went to her garden instead. The tomatoes were finished for the season, pulled, composted, the raised bed turned over and resting. But the frame was still there, solid along the back fence, built by her hands on a cold March morning that felt like a different life. She stood looking at it for a while. Then she went inside and made dinner. Daniel came over on Saturday, unannounced, but the kind of unannounced that felt different from Diane's version of it. He knocked. He waited. He came in with his hands in his pockets and an expression that sat somewhere between discomfort and genuine decency. Marcus was home. The 3 of them sat in the living room. The living room Claire had furnished in the house Claire had mortgaged, with the afternoon light coming through windows Claire had chosen because they faced west and caught the best hour of the day. Daniel looked at Claire directly. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked back at him. "For what specifically?" she asked. Not coldly, just precisely. "For not seeing it sooner. For not asking better questions when I visited." He paused. "For the dinner. The thing my mother said about Simone. I should have said something then. The dinner. 8 months ago." She was very domestic, very present. Claire had written about that evening in the witness document. 3 paragraphs, specific and dated. "You weren't the one who said it," she told him. "No," he said, "but I was the one who stayed quiet." She respected that. Not enough to change the trajectory of anything, but enough to feel it as real, which is its own kind of currency in moments like this. Marcus sat through Daniel's apology without speaking. That told Claire something she added to the witness document later that evening. Daniel apologized for his silence. Marcus did not apologize for his. Make of that what you will. Diane arrived on Sunday, without the casserole dish, without the wine, without the cheerful expansiveness that usually announced her presence like a weather system moving through a room. She arrived with a tightness around her eyes that Claire recognized as a woman recalibrating, reassembling a story she'd believed completely, and was only now beginning to understand had been built on a foundation she'd never examined. Marcus let her in, made coffee, set 3 cups on the table, the kitchen table, the same table where Claire had opened the laptop 2 weeks ago and shown Marcus a number that changed the temperature of everything. Diane sat down, looked at Claire, and for the first time in 3 years, Diane had nothing to say, not warmly, not coolly, nothing. Claire watched the certainty drain from her face, not in a single moment, but the way conviction drains when the facts underneath it give way, slowly, irreversibly. She thought about the phone call. "My son will divorce you," delivered with such absolute confidence, such complete, unexamined certainty, aimed at the woman who had written every check that kept Diane's son's life intact. She didn't say any of that at the kitchen table. She didn't need to. The spreadsheet existed. Patricia existed. The eventually folder existed with every subfolder intact, backed up in 3 separate locations, documented with the precision of a woman who had spent 3 years being underestimated by people who confused her silence with weakness. Diane wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I didn't know," she said finally. The words came out smaller than anything Claire had ever heard from her. "I know you didn't," Claire said. And that was the most devastating thing she could have said. Not "you should have known," not "I can't believe you didn't know." Just a quiet, level acknowledgement that Diane's ignorance was real, and that the person responsible for it was sitting at the same table, drinking coffee, saying nothing at all. Marcus looked at the table. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a child rode a bicycle past the window, carefree, unhurried, going nowhere in particular with complete commitment. Claire watched until the child disappeared from view. Then she picked up her cup, finished her coffee, stood up. "I have some work to finish," she said pleasantly, and she went to her desk. Behind her, the kitchen stayed quiet for a long time. She found an apartment on a Tuesday, not because Tuesday was significant, not because anything particular happened that day to push her finally, decisively across a line she'd been approaching for months. Just because she was on her lunch break, opened a listing she'd bookmarked 3 weeks earlier, read it again with fresh eyes and thought, yes, that one. 4th floor of a building 12 minutes from her office. 2 bedrooms, one for sleeping, one for working. South-facing windows that caught morning light the way she'd always wanted. A small balcony with just enough room for 2 chairs and a pot of herbs if she felt like starting over with something green. She scheduled a viewing for Thursday, told no one, went alone. The landlord was a quiet man in his 60s who showed her the space without commentary, which she appreciated more than he knew. He let the apartment speak for itself. The hardwood floors, the clean white walls, the kitchen with the good counter space, and the window above the sink that looked out onto a courtyard where someone had planted a maple tree that would be extraordinary in October. She stood in the empty living room for a moment. Just stood there, feeling the quality of silence that belongs to a space no one has claimed yet. Open, unhurried, waiting. She signed the lease that Friday. Marcus didn't know for 4 more days, not because she was hiding it. She'd moved past hiding things the moment she opened the laptop at the kitchen table and showed him the spreadsheet. but because she needed those 4 days to move certain things into place, practically, with the methodical precision that had always been her strongest instinct when the stakes were highest. Saturday morning, she called Patricia, confirmed the next steps, received a list of documents to gather, most of which were already organized in the financial subfolder because of course they were. Sunday she called the moving company, booked a date 3 weeks out, paid the deposit from her personal account. Sunday evening she called Sarah. "I signed a lease," she said. Sarah was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Do you need help packing?" she asked. That was all. "No, are you sure, or have you tried everything, or what if you just talk to him one more time? Just immediate, practical, unconditional presence." "Yes," Claire said. "In about 2 weeks." "I'll be there," Sarah said. She told Marcus on a Wednesday evening. Same kitchen table, same 2 cups of tea, same quiet house around them. He looked at her the way people look at something they knew was coming but convinced themselves wasn't. The expression of a man whose hope had been doing the work that his effort should have done. "Claire." "I've found a place," she said. "I'm moving in 3 weeks." He put his cup down, looked at the table, looked up. "We can fix this," he said. 2 words that arrived 3 years too late, delivered with the urgency of a man who had only just understood what losing actually felt like. She looked at him without anger, without cruelty, without the cold satisfaction that people sometimes imagine must accompany a moment like this. She looked at him the way you look at something you once loved completely and now understand clearly, with a grief that has already done most of its work, leaving behind something quieter and more permanent than pain. "Marcus," she said, "you had 3 years." He started to speak. She let him. He talked for a long time, about the job loss, about the pressure, about how he knew he'd leaned too hard on her, about his mother and the things he should have corrected and didn't, about the man he wanted to be and the gap between that man and the one he'd actually shown up as. It was the most honest he'd been in 3 years. She listened to all of it. Some of it was true. Some of it was the truth of a man rewriting his own story in real time, reaching for the most sympathetic version of himself available. She could tell the difference. She'd always been able to tell the difference, and she'd just spent too long pretending she couldn't. When he finished, she said, "I believe you mean that." He reached across the table, put his hand over hers. "Then stay," he said. "Give me a chance to show you." And here is the thing about that moment, the thing that matters most. It almost worked. Not because she was weak, not because she was confused or sentimental or susceptible to a well-delivered plea from a man who knew her well enough to reach for exactly the right register, but because she had loved him. Really, genuinely, rearrange your whole life loved him. And love doesn't disappear cleanly on a schedule. It lingers in the weight of a hand over yours at a kitchen table in a house you built together, even when you know, with every clear, documented, irrefutable part of yourself, that the building is already done. She looked at his hand on hers, looked at his face, thought about the spreadsheet, the folder, Patricia, the apartment with the south-facing windows and the maple tree in the courtyard, thought about a lamp in the wrong corner she'd eventually stopped fighting for, thought about 40 words in 4 hours. After she hung up, Claire sat quietly for a moment. Thought about Diane. Not with contempt. Contempt required energy she'd long since redistributed toward more productive purposes. More with the clear-eyed understanding of a woman who had spent 3 years being processed through someone else's story and had finally, permanently, stepped outside it. Diane needed a villain. Every story where the protagonist is blameless requires one. And Diane's story, the one where Marcus was a good man let down by an insufficient wife, could not survive contact with the actual financial record. So the financial record had to become something else, something sinister, manipulation, control, a calculated power play by a cold woman who'd never really loved her son, an impressive reconstruction, objectively, and completely, documentably false. Claire had the documents. She didn't need to use them. Living well wasn't revenge. It just felt like it sometimes on particularly good days. She went back to the brand strategy, finished it by 3:15. sent it to the client with a note that was warm and specific and exactly the right length. Poured herself a glass of water. Stood on the balcony for 5 minutes with the afternoon sun on her face. The client responded at 3:50 with 2 words. "This is perfect." She smiled. Went back inside for her 4 o'clock call. The weekend arrived the way weekends did now, unhurried, unscheduled, belonging entirely to her. Saturday morning she went to the farmer's market 3 blocks from her building. Bought tomatoes, the good ones, the ugly irregular ones that tasted like something real. And fresh bread and a bunch of flowers she had no particular reason to buy except that they were orange and she wanted them. She put the flowers in a glass on the kitchen windowsill, stood back, looked at them, moved them 2 inches to the left. They were perfect. Nobody rearranged them. That evening Sarah came over for dinner, just the 2 of them, wine, the tomatoes roasted with good oil and salt, bread torn by hand, conversation that ranged across everything and nothing with the ease of people who have earned each other's full presence. At some point, Sarah said, "Do you think about him?" Claire considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," she said. "Not often. Not the way I used to." "What do you think about when you do?" She turned her wine glass slowly on the table. "The good parts," she said. "The beginning. The barn wedding. The first year." She paused. "I don't think it was all a lie. I think he just never had to grow up inside it because I was always there making sure nothing got hard enough to require it." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That's generous," she said. "It's accurate," Claire said. "There's a difference." They finished dinner, cleaned up together. Sat on the balcony afterward with the last of the wine while the city settled into its Saturday evening below them. A couple walked past on the street holding hands. An old man walked a small dog with great ceremony. A group of young women laughed at something outside a restaurant across the street. The free laugh of people at the beginning of an evening with no particular end in sight. Claire watched all of it. Felt. Not wistful, not sad. Not the ache of someone watching life from the outside. Just present. Fully, simply, unremarkably present in her own Saturday evening in a life that was entirely and completely hers. "You seem different," Sarah said. "I am different," Claire said. "Good different." "Yeah." She took a sip of wine, looked at the street below. "Good different." The basil on the balcony railing moved slightly in the evening breeze. She'd almost killed it twice, thriving now. Some things, she thought, just needed the right conditions. That was all they'd ever needed. She didn't set out to have the conversation. It arrived the way most important things arrive, not through planning or intention, but through the accumulation of smaller moments that eventually reach a tipping point and spill naturally into something worth saying out loud. It was a Wednesday evening. Priya had stayed late to finish a client deliverable, the kind of extra effort that deserved acknowledgement, not just professionally but personally. Claire ordered dinner for both of them. They sat at the small table near the window in Claire's home office. Containers open between them, the city doing its Wednesday evening things outside. Priya was 26, smart in the way of someone who reads everything and questions most of it. She asked good questions, not to impress, but because she actually wanted the answers, which was rarer than it should have been. Somewhere between the main course and the last of the spring rolls, she asked one. "Can I ask you something personal?" Claire looked up. "You can ask. I'll decide whether to answer." Priya smiled. "Fair." She paused, choosing her words with the care of someone who understood their weight. "You built all of this. The business, this apartment, everything, while something else was falling apart. How did you know which one to focus on?" The question sat in the room for a moment. Claire set down her fork, looked at Priya, 26, sharp, at the beginning of a life that would require her to make exactly these kinds of decisions in exactly these kinds of moments, and thought about what an honest answer actually looked like. "I didn't always know," she said. "For a long time I was trying to hold both. The relationship and the work and the documentation and the legal groundwork and the emotional reality of what was happening. All of it, simultaneously, without dropping any of it. That sounds exhausting, Priya said. It was, Claire said. But exhaustion taught me something I don't think I could have learned any other way. Priya waited. It taught me the difference between load-bearing and decorative, Claire said. In architecture, some walls hold the structure up. Remove them and everything collapses. Other walls just divide space. They look necessary, but they're not. You can take them down and the building stays standing. Sometimes it's better for it. Priya was quiet, turning that over. He was decorative, she said. The relationship as it existed was decorative, Claire said carefully. The version I believed in and the partnership, the equal weight, the person I thought I'd chosen, that was load-bearing, that mattered. But what was actually there, when I stopped telling myself the story and looked at the structure honestly? She picked up her fork again. Decorative. They ate in companionable silence for a moment. Outside, the city moved through its Wednesday with indifference to the conversation happening 4 floors above it. What would you tell someone, Priya said, who's in the middle of it right now? Not at the end like you, actually in it. Claire thought about that carefully, not quickly, the way she might answer a professional question she'd answered before, but slowly with the weight of someone reaching for something true rather than something useful. Document everything, she said, not because you're planning to leave, not because you're building a case, but because clarity requires evidence, and your memory will lie to you when you're tired and lonely, and he's having a good week, and you want so badly to believe the good week is the real him. Priya nodded slowly. And keep building, Claire continued. Whatever is yours, your work, your skills, your income, your name on things, keep building it. Not as an escape route, as a foundation. Because the women who survive these situations aren't the ones who plan to leave. They're the ones who never stopped building something of their own even when they believed they were staying. The room was quiet. Priya looked at her with an expression Claire recognized. The attentiveness of someone storing something carefully, putting it somewhere it won't get lost. What about love? Priya asked. Do you think it was real? What you felt for him? The most honest question of the evening. Claire didn't answer immediately. She thought about a barn outside the city and wildflowers she'd arranged herself. A thin gold band with a small diamond that caught the light. A man crying when she walked in. The comfortable silence of 2 people who have chosen each other on a Friday night with takeout and nowhere to be. Yes, she said. Completely real. Then how do you make sense of it? Loving someone real and having it end this way? Claire looked out the window. Love isn't the whole story, she said. It's a necessary part of the story. But a marriage isn't built on love any more than a house is built on the idea of shelter. You need actual materials, honesty, equal effort, the willingness to see your partner clearly and be seen in return. She paused. We had love. We didn't have the materials. Priya absorbed that. Do you think he knew? She asked. How much you were carrying? I think he knew enough to be uncomfortable, Claire said, and not enough to change, which is its own kind of answer. They finished dinner, cleared the containers, made tea, moved to the living room where the lamp cast its warm light across the reading chair and the bookshelves Claire had filled slowly, deliberately, with things she'd chosen for herself. Priya looked around the room the way people sometimes did when they came here for the first time, taking in the quality of a space that has been assembled by someone who knows exactly what they like and has stopped apologizing for it. It's a really good apartment, she said. It is, Claire agreed. You seem really good, Priya said. Not a question. Claire considered it honestly, without performance, without the reflexive minimizing that used to pass for modesty, without the exhausting management of other people's comfort at the expense of her own truth. I am, she said. 3 years of carrying what should have been shared, 14 months of sole financial support, $51,000, a folder named eventually that became a life named now, A lamp in the right corner. Tomatoes nobody moved. Basil that almost died twice and then decided not to. A Saturday morning at a farmer's market buying ugly, perfect tomatoes for no reason except that she wanted them. A client who said this is perfect and meant it about the work, the actual work, the thing she built with her brain and her years and her absolute refusal to stop being excellent at something even when everything else was falling apart. She looked around her apartment, her walls, her light, her chair, her lamp, her books, her herbs on the balcony, her flowers 2 inches to the left where they were perfect and nobody moved them. All of it hers, completely, load-bearingly, structurally hers. "I really am," she said again, and meant every word of it. "One thing I never told you." Claire kept the spreadsheet, not as a wound, not as a weapon, as a reminder of exactly what she's capable of when nobody's watching. If this story felt familiar, watch our next video. It might change everything. End.